to start off on this Erev Shabbat and Tu BiShvat Seder. This is Jared Goldfarb.
Hi! I'm not used to using a microphone. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much for inviting me back to CRC. You forgot to mention that I've been here already.
You told me to keep it short.
8 years ago.
What did we say, 8, 9 years ago? Yeah. It's been a while, but it's so lovely to be back in St. Louis. It's back to see a lot of old friends and to be here at CRC learning together. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Before I share a few thoughts on Tu BiShvat and how it relates specifically to my home and what we're going through these days, I thought I'd just share a few quick words about myself and my journey, just very briefly, to understand sort of how I come to the texts and the teachings that I would like to share this evening. So you can hear from my very thick Middle Eastern accent that I am not originally from Israel. I was born and raised in New Hampshire. I lived in Boston for a short while. But my Jewish journey really started at a sort of an older age when I was in my 20s. And that happened largely in Boston. And ironically enough, one of my first sort of adult Jewish experiences was the Tu BiShvat Seder. Having already become a little bit of an environmentalist at university and living in Boston, that very much drew me in, amongst many other reasons, but drew me in to sort of seek out a Jewish identity of my own. And that process is what essentially brought me to Jerusalem about 30 years ago. And so I've called Jerusalem home for the last 30 years. My first sort of welcome into the world of Israel and the Jewish state was learning in a yeshiva. I ended up spending about 5 years in yeshiva. I very much fell in love with the Jewish textual tradition and then started a yeshiva of my own and ran that for 8 years. And so my first love in Israel was feeling connected not just to the land and to the space, but very much to the stories, the narratives, the traditions that come to us from this beautiful textual tradition. At that point, I started to branch out a little bit beyond my Jewish bubble, which was lovely, but it was very clear that that was not the entire story of what was going on in my neighborhood. And so I started to both learn about and eventually teach the history of all of the religious traditions in that land, particularly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and started to teach a lot about not only Jewish history, but Palestinian history, Palestinian identity. And very much felt then and feel today, as this has been largely my professional identity for the last 25 plus years, that education is the path to peace. And so I very much feel that as an educator, as a teacher, as a tour guide at times, that being able to share knowledge, to learn together, to challenge each other, and encounter the other is certainly one step in the right direction towards breaking down some of the barriers, the walls, the fear that we have, the othering that we do, and to try to bring people together, not necessarily to agree on anything, because of course that'll never happen, but to learn how to sort of live with our differences, but live in respect of each other and live in hopefully in peace with each other. So in addition to my teaching, I am still an environmental activist, and not only am I teaching Jewish texts and Christian texts and Muslim texts and the history of our narratives and the history of the Middle East and the geopolitical history, but I also do a bit of teaching on sustainability, specifically as it comes through our various religious traditions. So no surprise that Tu BiShvat is one of my favorite holidays and a wonderful opportunity for me to sort of blend all of the different elements that I love so much. And so I wanted to share a few of those thoughts with you this evening in 15 minutes or less. Go. So as many of you, I'm sure, are well aware, my neighborhood over there in the Middle East, it's been a little rough the last few years. Politically, domestically and internationally. and specifically in terms of the war that has been raging, and it may have calmed down a little bit, but it is very clearly not over, and we have a lot of work to do. And so it seems like perhaps an odd context to, certainly for me, to kind of focus on the beauty of this holiday of the New Year of the trees. But it is in fact the moment of war, the moment of destruction, the moment of killing even, when one of the most beautiful and important texts about our relationship to creation and about sustainability is shared with us. And it comes from the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 20. We learn, when you besiege a city for many days while fighting a war against it, in order to capture it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. For is the tree of the field human to withdraw from before you during the siege? And so that brief text right there kind of throws us for a loop a little bit, right? Here we are preparing the people of Israel just about to cross the Jordan River, recounting all of the laws that were given in the wilderness, coming into a land that certainly from our perspective, we call home, right? We've been yearning for 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and now we're about to cross into that homeland, while the folks who are still in that land, who did not experience the wanderings of the Israelites, are probably not on the same page in terms of who gets to call it home. And so there is a conflict brewing. We, of course, see it happen the moment the Israelites cross the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. And we are very clearly instructed that although there may be conflicts in the world and there may be war, we are forbidden from cutting down the trees. They cannot be destroyed. In the 13th century, 13th century, in Egypt, Rambam, the Maimonides, takes this concept of lo tashchit, you shall not destroy, and expands on it, saying that the prohibition applies not only to the trees, but one who might break a utensil, tear clothing, destroy buildings, stop up a spring, or spoil food in a wasteful manner. And one who does so has transgressed this prohibition in Deuteronomy chapter 20, lo tashchit, you shall not destroy. And so that one moment of war and the little blip of goodness, of watching out for the tree as you're literally slaughtering each other, expands into a concept that we carry with us through Jewish tradition, where we are meant to try to preserve everything, right? We simply are forbidden from wasting anything at all. Obviously, a very challenging concept, especially in the modern world in which we live. But it's quite beautiful that that concept originates with that tree, right? That tree in the middle of the battlefield. For is that tree human, and it could possibly get out of our way, like the humans that are caught up in this horrible conflict. And so living through the last 2.5 years of conflict, which of course is just a little nest inside, certainly for me, the last 30 years that I've lived in Jerusalem, always in some form of conflict, one or another, specifically between Israelis and Palestinians, but also in the wider Middle Eastern picture. And of course, that is just a small subset of the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has been going on for at least 100, 110 years, depending on when we start that story. And so this is a sort of a powerful moment for us as we celebrate the New Year of the Trees to perhaps remember that there is a little bit of glimmer of hope within that conflict. And maybe if we sort of focus on the tree in the battlefield, right, and not the weapons of destruction and the humans who are suffering, but we focus on the tree for a minute, maybe that can inspire us to find ways out of the conflict itself. And so I thought I'd just share a few examples of how this is actually happening on the ground today. Some of you may have heard of some of these initiatives and organizations, but they are part of my sort of personal struggle against conflict. And through my work as an educator for some of these organizations, I'm very inspired by what they do and very much believe that they are paving the path forward towards a more peaceful life in the neighborhood. So along these lines, this idea of not destroying trees, this has become a bit of a flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic. Not terribly new, but has become quite inflamed over the last few years, where particularly in the Palestinian concentrated areas, what most of them would simply refer to as Palestine, what many Jews refer to as Judea and Samaria, what much of the world refers to as the West Bank, we have seen the tree become the symbol of one's control or ownership over the land. The ability to plant a tree, to harvest from that tree, or the ability to cut down that tree as a sign of anger, frustration, pushback. And so this has been a tragedy, especially for a Palestinian economy in particular that relies quite heavily on agriculture, given the sort of the political relationship and the power dynamic between Israelis and Palestinians. Many Palestinians have very few options in terms of what kind of labor they can engage with, what kind of income they can generate for their family to sustain their communities. And so as a way of uplifting, preserving the Jewish tradition, there's an organization called Rabbis for Human Rights. Every year in the fall, we organize outings of Jewish Israelis in particular. Sometimes we get a few internationals, sometimes even a few Israelis who are not Jewish. But primarily the focus is to bring Jewish Israelis who feel deeply connected to the Jewish tradition and to the land into the Palestinian farmlands in order to both harvest specifically the olive trees, because the fall is the traditional harvest season, but to also protect them, to protect the trees, and to stand in solidarity with the humans, regardless of their political identity, their national affiliation, but to simply stand with the humans and prevent the potential destruction at the hands of some folks who often, I guess, think that by chopping down a tree, you're sort of sending a message, whatever that message may be. And so it's a very beautiful and powerful act that has been met with a tremendous amount of resistance, largely, certainly for most of the last 30 years that I've been engaged with it, by some of the angry folks who have sought to instill fear in the hearts and minds of the other, namely the Palestinians who are trying to farm and harvest. But recently, in the last few years, we have also faced resistance from our own government as the conflict has heated up the situation and created a deeper rift than we've ever experienced before between the two populations, and even within each of our populations as we sort of find ourselves moving away from each other, Jew from Jew and Palestinian from Palestinian. And so that act of going to join in a harvest with somebody that you don't know, you might not necessarily even agree with anything that they think, but simply to be there because of that tree has drawn us together, I think is a beautiful reflection of what Deuteronomy 20 reminds us. We have a Midrashic tradition, Midrash being, the storytelling tradition in Jewish history, that adds sort of a layer onto this notion of the role of the tree, not just in warfare, but even in times of peace. In Vayikra Rabbah, Midrash Rabbah on the book of Leviticus, It actually comments on a verse from Genesis. Go figure, the rabbis sometimes get a little lost. From the second chapter of Genesis, where we learn about the creation, and it says in the text that God planted a tree. Or God planted a garden, actually, a garden in Eden. And so the Midrash reads, from the very beginning of the creation of the world, God was not occupied with anything before planting, right? Because this is the beginning of our story. We have a garden, and then everything shows up. And so you too, when you enter the land, you should not occupy yourselves with anything before planting. So not only should we defend the tree, as in Deuteronomy 20, but we now need to essentially help produce the trees. We need to encourage this Garden of Eden to flourish around us. And so also within Rabbis for Human Rights, and it's very emotional for me not to be there at the moment, because literally on Sunday, when we celebrate the beginning of Tu BiShvat, all of my friends and colleagues will be once again going into these farmlands and planting saplings. And doing it in partnership with Palestinian communities. Again, not necessarily in any form of political affiliation, but simply just standing with other human beings and recognizing that this tree is very much a symbol of our love of the land, our deep historical connection to the land, and perhaps an opportunity to engage with each other, learn from each other, and not see each other as an other or an enemy. It doesn't always work, but it's a very, very powerful experience. And so that's just one initiative that has brought thousands of Israelis, many of whom would not describe themselves as in the peace camp, but certainly can understand that threatening one's livelihood, cutting down trees just out of spite, is probably not going to get any of us, certainly not us as Jews, to a space where we feel more secure and safe in the Jewish state. But, of course, tree planting is not enough. There needs to be a lot more work done, and there thankfully are hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations and initiatives that do amazing work in encountering the other, in learning about the other, in finding political solutions, social solutions, whatever it might be. And so I just want to briefly share one more initiative that I have found very, very inspiring in my experience. And it's rooted in another text that has absolutely nothing to do with Tu BiShvat. But I'm going to share it with you because it's one of my favorites. It has, I think, a lot of meaning and a lot of application, as you will soon see. This comes from the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Brachot. And we learn, it has been taught. Rabbi Akiva said, I once entered the toilet after Rabbi Yehoshua, and I learned 3 things from him. I learned that one should not defecate while facing east and west, but rather north and south. I learned that one should not relieve himself while standing, but rather while sitting. And I learned that one should not wipe with his right hand, but rather with his left. Ben Azai said to him, do you dare take such liberty with your teacher? He replied, it is Torah. I must learn it. The Talmud continues. Rav Kahana went up and lay beneath Rav's bed. He heard him chatting and laughing with his wife and taking care of his needs. Rav Kahana said to Rav, Abba's mouth is like one that has never tasted a cooked dish. That's a very complex rabbinic way of saying exactly what you think he's saying. Rav said to him, Kahana, are you here? Get out. This is not the way of the world. But he replied, it is Torah. I must learn it. What are we to glean from this very bizarre rabbinic text? For me, at least, and obviously I'm a little biased in this, everything is a teachable moment. There's always an opportunity to learn, even if it's the most inappropriate of spaces and times. And more importantly than that, the non-lesson in this text is not so much that it is Torah and I must learn it, but we should all be prepared that someone might at any moment be learning from us. So how do we live our lives? How do we act in the world as if somebody might be hiding in the shower while we are sitting on the toilet? Or might be hiding under our bed as we are having an intimate moment with our partner? Right? How do we remain conscious of that teaching opportunity even when we're not prepared to teach? And so living out our beliefs, trying to sort of live constructively, I think is a very, very important lesson for all of us. So the other initiative that I quickly just wanted to share with you is an institute that has become quite well known, or I should say much better known over the last few years, because there's been a lot of international press about what they've done. It's an organization called the Arava Institute. It's a sort of a branch of Ben Gurion University, which is based in Beersheba. This branch happens to exist on a kibbutz in southern Israel, just outside of Eilat, called Kibbutz Torah. Just so happens that this kibbutz is my home away from home. I am a Jerusalemite, but every chance possible, I head into the desert, sometimes alone, sometimes with my family, and Kibbutz Torah is my go-to place. I am sort of treated as a member of the community, even though I do not formally live there. I thought about living on kibbutz, and then I realized I don't like to share. So that doesn't work. That's a whole nother story. So the Arava Institute is based on Kibbutz Torah, and as I said, it's an academic institute, but one that's quite unique. It specifically focuses on environmental studies, but its mission is to bring together not only Israeli students, but also Palestinian students, Jordanian students, Egyptians, and internationals, recognizing that the challenges that face us in the natural world and our relationship to that natural world really do not care about any of our political boundaries. And so, living in a fairly tight corner of the world, where we're all on top of each other, we all experience the same challenges, right? If one guy on one side of the street doesn't have enough groundwater, right, flowing into his well, there's a good chance that the guy on the other side of the street is having that same issue. And so the Arava Institute has existed now for 25 years, specifically to bring people together to work on shared solutions to these shared challenges. But even more than that, by living on this campus in the middle of nowhere in the desert, right, they are forced to also build relationships with each other, build trust, learn about each other's identities and pasts and communities, faith traditions. And as we've sort of graduated many, many different years and cohorts through this program, we now have professionals all over the land working sometimes in Israeli and Palestinian governments who used to be bunkmates at the Arava Institute. And when you solve problems together, it's a lot easier to see the humanity in each other, because you're not challenging each other, you're not trying to one-up each other, you're simply trying to share each other's brain activity and come up with very viable solutions. And so, although I am not an active educator in the environmental program, I'm sort of an adjunct educator, mostly when some of these students come to Jerusalem. I do have the privilege and the blessing of leading one of their sort of cornerstone programs that has become very well known in Israel and throughout part of the world, at least, especially if you are a big fan of two-wheeled vehicles. We do a cross-country bike tour every year, starting in Jerusalem and ending in Eilat. And so every year I lead this bike journey through the Negev desert. We have riders that come in from all over the world. And as we ride, we learn about the land. We talk about the challenges. We share the solutions that have been devised by the students at the Arava Institute. All of the staff and the crew that help us along the way are either current students at the Arava Institute or alumni from the Arava Institute. And so as we ride and as we learn, we're engaging with Israelis, with Palestinians and Egyptians and Jordanians and any students that have joined them from around the world. And it is just an absolutely fascinating experience, both about sort of the environmental component in learning how Israel and Palestine are very much at the forefront of solving some of these challenges that face us all over the world. It's not, unique to what's happening in my corner. But at the same time, also learning about the power of relationship building. That finding some sort of common passion or interest is a way to move beyond that othering and to simply sit in a room and talk. And if you can't talk about politics or you can't talk about religion or you're afraid to talk about boundaries or the conflict, so talk about solar power. Talk about generating water out of air vapor, right? Talk about wastewater management. And that is a path towards building a relationship and trust that we have now seen truly as providing an example for what Israelis and Palestinians at large can do beyond just feeling like we're stuck in this unresolvable conflict. So that notion of always being prepared to sort of serve as an example, just by doing, and then hoping that somebody might be watching you and taking notes along the way. And so the most recent project of the Arava Institute, in partnership with a Palestinian institution known as the Damor Development Company, was going into Gaza, specifically as the war was playing out, and taking a look at some of the immediate needs of the civilian population that was obviously suffering during the war, as civilians on both sides were. Clearly on the Israeli side, we had access to many more resources and solutions. On the Gaza side, less so. And so the Arava Institute, in partnership with Damor, went in and was able to provide not just quickie solutions, but sustainable solutions for housing, for water supply, fuel, energy creation, you name it. And the fascinating thing was that at every site, on every project, there is a big sign that proudly declares that that solution is being provided through a partnership between an Israeli organization and a Palestinian organization. Once again, you don't even need to say anything, but anybody who might show up for a free meal or to apply for a tent or to be able to, charge their phone in a solar energy generator, whatever it might be, they see that that solution is being provided by a relationship that they didn't think was possible, or that they didn't want to happen, or that they were fearful of happening because of what essentially conflict is generated in our neighborhood. And so using those sort of two organizations, those two initiatives as examples, I hope that you can see as well as I do that the notion of loving our land, loving the environment, remembering the tree, can truly be an inspiration for not just living healthily or living in a planet that will not collapse around us, but can often inspire us to do things we might not have thought to do otherwise, and hopefully repair the world a little bit. And so I'll end with my favorite Midrash from Echa Rabbah that you might know because it's fairly well known, but I think it speaks volumes, especially in the world in which we live right now. When the Holy Blessed One created Adam, God took him and led him around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, "Behold my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. All that I have created, I created for your benefit. Take care that you do not ruin and destroy my world. For if you destroy it, there is no one to repair it after you. So let's take up that charge and go fix something, and maybe along the way we'll make a friend. Shabbat shalom.